I don't think there's been a single movie in the past decade that has had more pressure on it than James Gunn's Superman. And this is not just a reboot of one of the most iconic characters ever created, but if you've paid attention to any of the marketing or any of the online discourse, you also know this is the restart of the DC cinematic universe. It's a fresh start after what Zack Snyder tried to do with Man of Steel on, and it just kind of flopped financially and critically. And after Batman vs. Superman came out, a lot of the momentum of the series just really went downhill, and I will compare this Superman movie to Man of Steel later on in this video. But I'll say I was cautiously optimistic about this movie. Ever since James Gunn and Peter Safran were announced of taking over this entire studio, and ever since James Gunn released that video about 2.5 years ago, at this point, it's crazy, it's been 2.5 years since that came out, that's insane. But when he was breaking down his plan for this chapter 1 of the DC Cinematic Universe, I was pretty interested. I had faith that James Gunn would do a pretty solid job. I think Gunn has a very unique, clear voice when it comes to making comic book movies. And even though I like a lot of his work, I've never considered him like this savior of superhero movies. I really like the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie a lot, but something like his recent Suicide Squad movie that was loved by critics and audiences that are into comic book movies, I was just not really a fan of it. That type of humor is just really not for me. It felt like it was written for 12-year-olds that were finally able to sneak into a rated R movie. But I was really rooting for this movie. I wanted it to work. And to be honest, I'm not the biggest Superman guy out there. I saw the first 2 Christopher Reeve movies when I was a kid, and again, just not really my thing. I would be very open to rewatching those movies as an adult, but I'm not going to act like I know everything about Superman. I do not. I'm going into this movie wanting to be sold on Superman as a character. And I know the pitch from the beginning from James Gunn has always kind of been along the lines of, we want to bring Superman back into the glory days of Superman, where he is that iconic character of the modern age. We want him to give that feeling of hope, and we want to bring the comic book into live action. That seemingly was the goal. And I got to see this movie about a week ago at this point, so a lot of the internet has already made up their mind, like they always do. And the discourse has either been, this is the greatest movie of all time, Zack Snyder is dead in a ditch, and then on the opposite side, you have, this is the worst thing they have ever done to Superman. Zack Snyder saved him from the beginning. But with a lot of things like this, I tend to be one of those people that falls right in the middle of a lot of these things. And when you're in the middle, both sides hate you, so it doesn't even matter anyway. And in the case of this Superman movie, I really do feel like I fall in the middle. I think it is overall a pretty solid film. At points, I really do think it's just like a, this is okay kind of movie. Like, there are things I will get to in this video that really do bug me, but I do think there is a pretty big list of a lot of great things that this movie does, and I think that list of great things overall outweighs my list of negative feelings I have for the movie. And again, I should preface this video with, not only am I not a big Superman fan, I'm just not a big comic book fan. I didn't really grow up on that kind of stuff, but I am somebody that wants these types of movies to be good, so more people go out and see the movies. And when there are things to be praised about any movie of any genre, no matter what it's about, I will be the person to praise it, because that is what I do on the internet. And I think one thing that James Gunn does really good in this movie is how quickly he establishes the world of both Superman and the rest of the DC universe. And he does it really fast. Like, I would honestly have to sit and think and do some research on what are some of the best opening crawls of movies ever. I would really have to sit and look at that list to determine if this is a top 5 or a top 10 opening crawl of all time. But it was so well written. And the second the last sentence shows up, it is impossible to not be locked in by the end of it. And from that point on, even if I don't love some of the directions that James Gunn goes with the film, it is clearly always James Gunn's movie. It never feels like he's making something he doesn't want to make. It feels like this was the plan from the get-go. This is what I want in my Superman movie, and that is what I'm making, and there was no compromise there. And I would rather have that than somebody who has an idea for a Superman movie and then it gets botched with studio interference. I think this is the better route to go with, even if all of those things that James Gunn wanted aren't fully for me. I do think it feels a little Marvel-ish at times, and I think the only reason I say that is because I've grown up with so many of these MCU movies moments that to me there was a distinction between what Zack Snyder was doing and what Marvel was doing tonally. And it does have a bit of that Marvel coat to the tone, but I do think James Gunn does a good job of, if Zack Snyder is adapting more serious adult graphic novels, I think James Gunn does a really good job at adapting the comics that would turn into Saturday morning cartoons. And since that is the tone he is going for, I think he nails it pretty consistently here. If I had kids right now, I would take them to this movie. I think this is the perfect, like, if your kid is 7 or 8 years old and they haven't seen a PG-13 movie in theaters yet, I think this is a good one to take them to. It does have a couple of adult moments, especially around the Lex Luthor stuff, but I do think there's enough bright colored, family friendly stuff in here that it would make a good movie for any family out there. And I think one thing I never noticed about superhero movies, like there was a lot of talk that James Gunn wanted Superman to save people. And in my head, I'm like, superheroes save people all the time. But after watching this movie and I start thinking back to especially a lot of the Marvel stuff that's come out over the past 20 years, I always think like, yeah, there aren't a lot of scenes of superheroes saving regular people. Like there'll be lines of, if we don't stop the stone of power, everyone's gonna die. But we rarely ever see them helping people in battle, right? There's very few moments like the Spider-Man 2 subway scene where Spider-Man is saving all those people. And I think what Gunn does a really good job at is making Superman super likable from the get-go. Like there's little moments like him saving a squirrel. That kind of sums up the version of the character that they're going for here. And I think a lot of those moments when Superman is just interacting with normal people in the street are some of the better parts of the movie where I was feeling something. And to balance that, I also think Gunn does a pretty good job at keeping his humor in check. And I'm not talking about tweets here. I think his type of comedy worked best in Guardians of the Galaxy and worked worst in the Suicide Squad. Again, that's a personal take. I understand a lot of people disagree with me on that. There's definitely humor in here for sure, but I don't think there's enough eye-rolling kind of humor. Like there were only 2 jokes in here that really made me go like, oh my God, why are we doing this? But I feel like when I watch a lot of the MCU movies and their type of humor, I have one of those moments roughly 7 to 15 times depending on the movie. So at least in that regard, I think it's a pretty big step up. And I do think Gunn can be funny. But some of the humor really works in this movie, especially a lot of the stuff with Skylar Gisondo, who plays Jimmy Olsen at the Daily Planet. He does a pretty awesome job in this movie, whether it's the actual delivery of certain jokes or just a facial expression. He was consistently cracking me up. I think that was perfect casting. And I don't think that's any different for a lot of the characters in this movie. I think whoever cast this movie did an incredible job. But I want to get into the bigger performances, starting with David Corenswet as Superman. I didn't know anything about this guy other than he was in Pearl, Twisters, and he's a huge Philadelphia Eagles fan. So in my book, he's doing great. There isn't a lot of Clark Kent stuff in this movie, which I was honestly pretty surprised by. I just assumed since this was the first Superman movie in this new DCU that it would be like 50% Clark, 50% Superman. It's more like 90% Superman, 10% Clark. So mainly as Superman, I really like David's take on the character a lot. I think he fits exactly what James Gunn is going for here. He just feels like the perfect fit for a guy that just wants to do everything right and help people. He has like this powerful but like innocent nature to him, and also does a good job at portraying a Superman that's still trying to figure out how to be Superman. And I want to say I bought him for like 96% of the movie. The other 4% was like the 2 or 3 times he starts yelling. I just feel like anytime he yelled in this movie, it came off too fucking goofy. Like a lot of people say some of the best moments are when he starts yelling, and I can't take that seriously. I thought it was so cringy. But as long as they don't do that same kind of yelling again, I do think he is the best possible person to build a universe around. And I love when somebody that's a pretty relatively unknown actor gets a huge role like this and nails it, and I can't wait to see what else he does in future projects. Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane is also really, really good in this movie. I think she really nails the I'm a journalist first kind of role. They do it in a pretty obvious way early on, but I still think she does a really good job with that. And I think they do it in a way that it instantly makes you feel like you gain a lot of respect for her. And I also think the other moments where she gets to show off her more emotional side, she also does a really good job with. But most importantly, when it comes to Superman and Lois Lane, I like them both individually, but more importantly, they work really well together. I think the chemistry feels good. It doesn't feel like you're watching 2 actors trying to put on a performance for each other. It feels like a couple that has gotten to know each other over the the course of 3 months, I guess they mentioned. And that's what you want out of any romance in any movie. And I think if that wasn't a selling point of this movie, if you didn't buy into that, you're not going to buy into a lot of their movies moving forward. So those two together, excellent. But I think my favorite performance of the movie has to go to Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. And honestly, it's probably not even close. Like, this is a performer that I think in terms of people that talk about movies online, we all like Nicholas Hoult. But I think in terms of the mainstream audience, a lot of people still don't really know who he is. But that is clearly not going to be the case anymore because he demolished this role. I expected him to be pretty good, but he was way better than I thought he was going to be. He's just so good in every single scene. And even though I liked him throughout the movie already, when it comes to the part where he has the revolver, both the writing and the performance just do so much justice to that character. Like, you want a level of bad guy where every time they show up on screen, you're like, God, can this guy just fucking die? And I feel like Nicholas Hoult nails that role. You really hate this guy by the end of the movie. And I think that kind of energy from bad guys has been missing in superhero movies for a long time. My most consistent complaint about the Marvel movies, besides the terrible humor, has always been like, they do get a Thanos every like 15 years. But for the most part, so many of their bad guys are so one note and boring that they just kind of go in one movie and leave. Not the case here. I really hope with these future DC movies, they put a huge emphasis on villains like this. I know there's not going to be as many people as talented as Nicholas Hoult, but if this is the standard of what we could expect for the rest of these movies, we are in for a good time. Twitter has already explained that this guy is like the most top tier hater ever, and I love the writing of him. He has so many scenes where he starts going like 1A, 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 and he's just going off like that. It is one of the most entertaining moments of the year. I loved it. I can always say he was great so many times, but I will say out of everyone in this cast, I am probably most excited to see more of him than anyone else in this movie. I don't know enough about Lex Luthor and other adaptations to say if this is the definitive version of the character, but I really loved it. But since this is the start of a cinematic universe, they do take the time to build out a lot of side characters, more than I thought they would going into the first movie in a universe like this. Starting with the Justice Gang, I really enjoyed Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner. The clips and trailer moments I had seen prior to going to this movie had me really nervous I was not going to like him. Like, just the way I saw the goofy haircut and the type of tone I expected from a James Gunn movie, I really thought he was going to end up being my least favorite part just based off looks alone. But you can't judge a book by its cover. I thought he was really good. I think a lot of his jokes really worked. He was one of the funnier parts of the movie, and I think he plays the role just right. Like, I don't know if I would want this guy in a full movie. I think he works probably better in small doses, but time will tell on that. And besides Jimmy Olsen, he probably got the most laughs out of the movie for me. Then you have Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific, and this is another character I had a lot of fun with. And it seems like a lot of diehard comic book fans really love this guy's performance, so clearly he nailed the role of whatever he is in the comic books. I don't think I held him as high up as a lot of people did coming out of the movie. It seems like a lot of the talk online is like, oh my God, Mr. Terrific was awesome. And I thought he was definitely really cool, and I'm excited to see more of him, but I didn't walk out of Superman like, man, I need a Mr. Terrific movie right now. I think I need to see more of the character before I go that far, but I do think he was really good, and I do think I am excited to see him in future movies. Isabella Merced plays Hawkgirl. She definitely has the least amount of things to do in this movie. Twitter loves her. They're like, oh my God, Hawkgirl is one of the best parts. We need to see more of her, just because they think she's really hot. Believe it or not, I care more about the character and the writing than somebody's looks, so I wasn't super impressed with Hawkgirl at all. I think there is potential with the character. She does have one good part towards the end of the movie, but overall, like, I didn't feel much coming out of this movie about her. Anthony Carrigan, though, as Metamorpho, I had to read that name, I'm sorry. I couldn't give less of a shit about this character, man. I guess out of all these side characters, he's supposed to get the most depth, like, barely, right? He does have one emotional part where they try to build up his character a bit, but I just thought the voice acting for him was so goofy. And maybe it's supposed to be a little goofy because it is based off a comic book, but I don't know. Like, as soon as he talked, I was like, oh my God, that's what this guy sounds like? And when he starts using his powers, it looks horrendous. And I'm sure it's comic accurate, but I'm watching it like, holy shit, why is this guy in the movie? We already introduced enough of these Justice Gang characters. We don't need another guy. And then by the end of this movie, when I realized like they kind of set him up to have a bigger role in future projects, I was like, really? We're making this guy important in this universe? Maybe my mind will change on him later, but I really did not like this edition. I thought it was really half-baked. I don't think the casting was all that great. I think they could have gone for a deeper voice. And I thought I was going to feel similar about Crypto the dog. Nothing against dogs. I do like dogs, but I didn't think I needed that in this movie. It just felt like they wanted to sell Crypto the dog merchandise to their kids that they want the plushie of. But I will be the first to admit, I liked Crypto the dog in this movie. I didn't hate it. I think I liked it so much because he wasn't overused like I kind of expected him to be. And there are some pretty obvious teases that Crypto is probably going to have more screen time in an upcoming movie. But for now, I think he was cute and occasionally funny. And that's more than we could say about most comedians these days. But even with all of these characters, it never felt like too cameo-festy. I think that's partly because a lot of people don't know who any of these characters are, which I understand why James Gunn wants to put characters like this in a movie as big as Superman. Like, you want to get people excited for them in future movies. I do think he's effective in getting people more excited for certain characters, especially like someone like Mr. Terrific. But I do think I would have probably preferred to just focus on Superman for the first movie. And I'll get into that in a little bit. I want to talk about a couple more positives, but I think he used these characters just enough before we got sick of them. And I do appreciate that. I think the thing I love about this movie the most, though, which is ironically the thing I love the most about Man of Steel, is the music. The score for each of the movies just fits the tone of Man of Steel and Superman so well. Like, those scores are meant to be for those movies. And music is one of those things I don't think enough people talk about, how if you have great music, it could elevate something that just feels okay in certain points. And if you have bad music, it could kind of downgrade a really good scene. And I think whenever they mix some of the most emotional scenes of the movie while the music is playing, those are my favorite parts of this movie. Those were the parts that I had a genuine smile on my face. And I do think it's the moments like that that are making so many people connect with this movie, because there are like 2 or 3 parts where as the music is playing, you really feel like you're watching a classic movie scene in real time. And that's what you want out of one of the biggest movies of the year. Every movie that is on a huge budget should be making us feel that way. Not a lot of them do, and that's a shame, but I do think they nailed that aspect of the movie. And I'll be honest, I'm still not a huge fan of some of James Gunn's needle drops. I'm not going to say I'm not a fan of them, because there are some that work really well for me, especially in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. But for example, this might be my hottest take of the year, honestly, the way I'm seeing people talk about it on Twitter. Like, the song they used for the ending going into the end credits was really not for me. I just felt like it didn't fit the movie. A lot of people disagree with me on that. That's fine. Not for me. But I guess in terms of other hot takes, let's talk about the 2 things I really don't like about Superman. The things that really hold this back from being a great movie, at least for me. And there are 2 things that you really do need to start nailing in superhero movies, and that is the action and the visual effects. And I don't think the action is necessarily terrible, but I never once found it fun at all. Like, if I were to watch this movie again, there would not be a single action set piece in this movie that I would look forward to seeing in the theater. The moments I would be excited to see are the ones I just talked about, where you have an emotional moment with that amazing music in the background. Those are the things I'd be excited to see again. But all of the fights, I just didn't think they were choreographed terribly. They just weren't super exciting. And I think what made it worse was James Gunn shoots some of them in a way where you're supposed to think like, God, look how cool this looks. Like, the first time Mr. Terrific shows off his powers, they make a big deal out of it. And I'm watching it like, this is the lamest thing I have ever seen. And I do like that character. I think in terms of the performance, he's awesome. I just was not impressed by his action scene at all. And by the time we get to the final action set piece, I just like didn't care visually what was going on. It was just really boring to me. And I do feel like when you have a character like Superman, and this is your first movie in a franchise that you want to last 10 or 15 years, you do need some better action. I don't think it's bad enough where people would care too much, but I also don't think a lot of people would put, like, if Watch Mojo is making a list of top 10 superhero fights in movie history, I don't think anything from this movie is making that list. And I was honestly expecting a bit more in that department. And I think part of that has to do with the CGI, which I think is by far the worst part of the movie. The budget of this movie is $225 million. And the action sequence in the Pocket universe looks like it's straight out of Spy Kids 3D Game Over. And I know the objective of the movie movie by design was to be as opposite of Man of Steel and Zack Snyder as possible, but there are parts of this movie where Ant-Man 3 looks better. And it really is only like the Pocket Universe segment where I really felt heavily about this. Like there is some CGI throughout that I don't think looks great, but when you have this metamorpho guy like transforming and he looks like a squid at one point and you have Superman going down this river of pixels, I just didn't think it looked good at all. And it really took me out of the movie. And at that point, I was really sitting there like, God, come on. Like now I got logged 2.5 stars on Letterboxd. And one minor complaint that I don't even know is necessarily a complaint, but it is something I've been thinking about over the past week is, in hindsight, I don't think skipping the origin story is a good idea, because I think as this movie ages out, it's going to be something we wish we had when we had this opportunity to reboot this entire universe. I know James Gunn's argument has been we don't need to see the origin of characters like Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, because people know those origin stories. And maybe he's right. Time will tell. But I think I grew up in a generation that, for the most part, didn't really have a Superman movie that we loved. And I feel like there's certain movies, right? Like Superman Returns was a movie I've never seen, but it was still kind of a sequel to the Christopher Reeve situation. And it wasn't as big as something like Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man or the X-Men or even Batman Begins. Like those are movies that my generation grew up with and will always hold in our memory that also happen to be origin stories. But with Superman, like, yeah, Man of Steel is an origin story, but by the time that came out, I was definitely older teenager, and I don't think a lot of young kids really grew up on Man of Steel like that. Like it's kind of a more niche superhero movie. And even though I like the opening crawl, I do kind of wish we saw more of the buildup of that story. I would love to have seen more of him and Lois's relationship early on. I would have liked to see a little bit of Krypton. Like I'm sure part of the plan is to incorporate a lot more of that stuff in other movies, but I do feel like there should have been a little bit more. And again, I don't even think that's necessarily a huge problem now, but I have seen some people complain like they don't feel like being dropped in the middle of a show, and comic book fans have gone back to that and they're like, well, we've been waiting for years for a Superman movie, we don't need the origin. But that is like such a minority of people that watch movies. I do think it would have been a benefit to the legacy of this franchise. Like when somebody in 15 years goes back to binge the DCU, I do think it's a little jarring that the first movie within that franchise doesn't have an origin story and just starts. And if I'm wrong about that, I'm wrong about that, and I'll own that. It is just something that's been on my mind for a while, and I'd rather document it now while the movie is just released. I am probably one of the few people that doesn't know if I prefer this or Man of Steel. It's been about 10 years since I rewatched that movie, but I did like what Zack Snyder attempted to do with the character. I know a lot of people hate it, and a lot of people think it's the best superhero movie ever made. I don't fall in either of those camps, but I did find it interesting, and I never thought it deserved the type of hate and the level of hate that it got. I just think some of the Snyderverse stuff got so out of control that it made people hate Zack Snyder more. And look, I like how we live in a world where we got both versions. There is a world where there would only ever be one Superman movie that ever came out, but we live in a time where people that like different tastes of superhero movies got whatever taste they wanted. The Dark Knight is, and honestly probably always will be, my favorite superhero movie, but there are a lot of diehard comic book readers that have loved Batman for 50 years that don't think The Dark Knight is a good representation of what they want to see in a Batman movie. And to me, that's fine. I want that person to get the Batman movie that they want to see, because The Dark Knight is never going to go away. I'm never going to say restore the Nolanverse. But I do think the more I sit with this movie, the more I do enjoy it. It's not going to end up on my personal top 10 movies of 2025, because at the end of the day, like, this still isn't my type of movie. And even though it's solid for what it does, I just like different types of movies more than this. But I do think it sets a really good foundation for this franchise. I think it's a good baseline. I think a lot of movies can be nurtured from the ground up of characters we haven't seen before. And hopefully the momentum of this movie continues into other projects. Like, I am very excited to see the Lantern show and the Supergirl movie. And I wasn't expecting to feel that way after watching Superman, but I'm sure those are the kinds of statements that David Zaslav loves to hear. And even though I don't think this is James Gunn's best work to date, I still think it was a pretty solid job at rebooting a franchise that really needed help. So this is Chase. Thank you so much for watching as always. And if you don't want to miss any future reviews of future DCU projects, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of those.